I was questioning if we are ready to really break free from fossil fuels. And did you read the Project Drawdown book this year, the new book? Project Drawdown by Paul Hawkins? No? How many of you read it? Can you raise your hand? I think we all were a little shocked about the main problem that we have with fossil fuels, that is the use of oil for fridges and cooling systems, right? Many people was more focused on cars. And well, what I was questioning in this welcoming letter is if we are ready to turn the fridge off. How many of you use a fridge in your kitchen? And how many of you don't need a fridge in your kitchen? Can you raise your hand? Sally, you don't use a fridge? You use or you don't use? Okay, but who don't use a fridge in their kitchen? Can you raise your hand? Or a cooling system? So, I mean, what I would like to know, if we are ready to confront this challenge of turn off our fridge off. Would you do that? Because that's the main problem, you know, that we are here and we are trying to change things the way they are, but it's very hard sometimes to commit to do something like that because it's not normal, no? But if we are living in the new normal is abnormal in terms of what we learned from the past, like the hurricanes that now are happening in the East Coast that are terrible and that are not normal to happen in New York or in New Orleans, in Houston. We also have to live in a different normality that is what we until now haven't lived in, no? And I think this new reality has to be changing our lifestyle. Like, for example, if we can turn the fridge off, if we can stop driving, if we really do what we believe that is the best for the planet. But I don't know how many of us can take that challenge and say, okay, I'm gonna do it, you know? I think that is really hard because we grow up with this. And I personally, I don't drive. I have never driven in my life, I cannot drive. My grandfather was a cab driver for 40 years in Mexico City in night shifts. And I don't know, I think he already polluted enough that I cannot pollute anymore, you know? So I ride my bike all the time. I have never flown in a plane, you know? And I am not really young, you know? So, and I don't want to say that I am pure or something like that. It's just maybe an accident that I hate cars, I don't like engines, you know? But I wonder how many people, if I have survived my whole life without a car or without flying, I don't know if people who are used to drive or to fly, if they could stop, if they could reverse the impact that the way they are impacting the planet. You know, I don't know how many of you have been thinking in changing radically some things in your lifestyle. Can you raise your hand?
24 years without a car.
You? But you can buy the most expensive car. You can buy the most expensive car. And you don't have a car. No, actually, I always see Theo, and she has very comfortable shoes. And it's super light the way she walks, you know. I have been walking with her to the bar station. She just had a surgery on her knee, and she was not driving, you know. So I think there is that is the main problem, that we are not afraid to, really not afraid to hurricanes or climate change or droughts or heat waves. We are more afraid to change our lifestyle, you know. And I think that is the main problem. But I'm going to stop this rant, and I'm going to invite Theo to come. And Theo has an amazing presentation, but it's not just Theo. Today is going to be amazing. And I would like to mention a couple of the presentations that I cannot say anything about just one, but all of them are amazing. And I hope you really enjoy today.
This is the final day of the 2017 Soil Not Oil Conference. This is the day where we have the opportunity of sharing some solutions and some opportunities. And Miguel started it off. He started it right off. Geez, you know, can we do without a fridge? Can we do without a car? Can we do without flying? And you know, I mean, bottom line is maybe eat meat, you know, one day a week, maybe, I mean, you know, just whatever it is, it makes a huge difference. So I'd like to invite my panel up and just share a couple of overviews about what I've learned so far in this wonderful event and what we propose to engage you in today. I learned a couple of things that, you know, are just fundamental to my core. The beautiful young woman, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, who Diana brought, who's the shepherdess, told me about a fluid, the seas of our land, the flock of herds, a flurd. I thought that was fantastic. And that they're ecological doctors, those shepherdesses and shepherds, because basically the way that the land is vital is the stomping of those hooves on the land to make the rhizomes and the mycelia just go, ooh, ooh, we've got it going on, because actually they do. So there's some issues today that we're going to kind of pay attention to. I heard that leases of 3 to 5 years for farmers were attractive. I actually challenge that. I think with all the dignity and respect that we need to offer our farmers, we need to enable them to have the opportunity to access to agricultural land and grow their families, their lives, and their livelihood as they grow our food. So that means community land trusts. So community scale activities are being invited. As so eloquently said by Kari Hockmeyer, the farmer and activist yesterday, we need to support these high cost, high risk professionals and enable choices and solid returns on investment for both the farmers and the community in which they farm, and that requires that the farmers own their land. Now, there are many ways to have that happen, and that will be addressed. We do agree that we all need to grow flowers for our pollinators and then to celebrate the beauty of our lives and not experience Roundup rain. It's a scary thing. So we in this panel are honored to present issues and practices that we address and ways to be and live going forward. Our first presenter is Kendra Johnson, who is she's a land access professional, long-range farmer, access to resilient agricultural base. She addresses loss of agricultural farmland, farm succession crisis, lack of land access and cost to farmland. And then Eric Mathis, Climate Change 3.0, the emerging regenerative economy. And then Stuart, who is with us from Michigan, will tell us about the Community Cultural Food Shed Resilience Program. And then most important, our final activity is to open it up to questions to you. So with that, I'll bring up Kendra.
Can I see this while I'm talking? Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Theo. Thank you for this challenge.
Yes, indeed.
Next slide, please. Do I have a clicker? Oh, I can do that. I'll do it. What's that? Great. Thank you. So this is me at age 23 farming on an acre right over the hill here in Moraga, standing in our spring cover crop with my friend Sarah. I left that. That was the funnest thing I ever did. Did that for 4 years and left partly because of the lack of secure land access and any long-term ability to be there. For a resilient food economy to be possible, we must address the health of our soils, the future of family farming, and the distribution of land. We continue to lose agricultural land at a rate of 40 acres per hour in the US. Here in California, some of the world's best and deepest soils are disappearing to development all the time. This is not new to you. Farmland is lost to real people, too, due to structural inequities. The work of the Land Loss Prevention Project in the Southeast is addressing the terrible losses of land to Black family farmers there. So this is people, not just our landscapes, that are in peril. Farms are being consolidated quickly. The largest 4% of American farms now use well over half of our farmland. A lot of that's not really actually growing food. The number of large farms is growing, the number of very small farms is growing, but the mid-scale family farms, those ones that are commercially viable and that are the pillar of regional food systems, are disappearing. It's much like the economic middle class. I think we need to be really concerned about this. Farms are losing ground. And farm succession. This is a crisis. Farmers are getting older. A third of all U.S. farmers are 65 years and older now, and the attrition rate of beginning farmers is very high. Former farm workers, farm managers, farm employees who would probably be the obvious candidates to take over some of these family farms whose kids are no longer interested, face tremendous structural barriers to financing and to land access, to taking over these businesses. And so continuity is very, very hard for us to maintain. So what's going to happen to these 400 million acres that are due to change hands in the next 20 years? Most of it is expected to be passed down to family trusts, to largely non-farming heirs. A lot of it is continuing to be swallowed up by large-scale corporate agriculture or bought by outside investors. I'm sure Anuradha talked about this last night. I was really sorry to miss her. That little tiny slice of ag land that might go on the market for sale to new entry farmers is not affordable. How many of you know a farmer who has either had to go out of business or move because they couldn't afford the land they were on? Yeah. This is very concerning when we don't have access to a land base for the people who we rely on to steward our landscapes. Per acre farm values are continuing to rise beyond the capacity of farmers to produce incomes. Rural residential land buyers are outbidding farmers. And housing. Farmers can't even afford housing, as Katie pointed out yesterday, to live where they work. So the free market itself, as Stuart has pointed out, is creating this problem. It won't solve it. How must we, as individuals, as communities, as institutions, begin to invest and reinvest in a viable agricultural land base? First of all, farm viability, right? All of us, the eaters, get to participate by putting our money where our mouths are. So thank you, and I think you're all doing this. So farm succession, the importance of continuity can be addressed partly by investing in land and farm linking programs, right? Bringing the older generation and younger generations together, helping smooth transitions, beginning farmer training programs like Brittany's concept of bringing a shepherding school to the US. I love that too. And then some creative succession thinking about continuity. This man, Jeff Main, invested in growing a farm for his whole adult career and realized that as he looked forward to retirement, as most farmers rely on their land as their retirement, that as soon as they decided to sell that land, the market would do its job very well, and good humus would cease to be a farm. The highest and best use of 20 acres in the Cape Bay Valley is maybe a pony ranch or a rural estate, right? So Jeff and Annie want to continue their farm to continue to mature and to sustain future generations of farmers. We're going to talk about what they did in a moment. There are lots of ways to invest political will and financial resources in agricultural land conservation, planning tools, mitigation policies, conservation easement programs like the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program here in California that Renata talked about yesterday, support for regional land trusts and public agencies, and local efforts. In the Davis and Sacramento regions, the food co-ops there got together with Jeff and Annie Main and said, we really care about the farms that are sustaining our own co-ops and our member bases, and we will raise money to protect these small, otherwise unpreservable family farms that we care about and want to have access to in future generations. We must not stop thinking about farm preservation as land preservation alone, but rather start to address the issues of affordability. Here we go. Income diversity, we know, is very important to healthy urban communities. The same is true of rural communities. It's time to start applying affordable housing tools in rural areas. One of the ways we can do this is through a community land trust model. Also, there are ways to provide incentives for owners to sell their land or to pass on land to next generation farmers that I don't have time to go into right now. And the community land trust model is beginning to take hold. This is where a community would own a piece of agricultural land, a whole working farm, and lease it long-term to a farmer with the option for a lifetime's worth of work and equity in the buildings and soil improvements and infrastructure. And then there's finally a way that farmers can continue to own land on protected farms that have provisions for continued agricultural stewardship and affordability. So the good humus easement is a whole farm approach. This goes beyond the scope of a traditional agricultural easement to ensure that the sale price of that farm would be limited to its farm value, that only qualified farmers could purchase a bona fide farmer could qualify to purchase that property and must live there and farm there and adhere to basic stewardship standards as determined by the land trust and the owners at the same time. So this project is wrapping up, and we're really excited to soon add to the precedent in California for an unusual approach to farm preservation. So again, how do we invest creatively in land ownership by farmers and ranchers? How do we redirect capital into regenerative farming and help tilt the balance of ag land distribution back towards the smallholder? It's time to do this. We have small community efforts. The farmers on the right mounted a fundraising campaign with their CSA and local customers to, thank you, to buy a barn on land that they're leasing from the Sonoma County Agricultural and Open Space District with a medium-term lease, not as long as we'd like. You know, I addressed a room full of land trust professionals a few years ago here in California, and I asked them, how many of you lease land to farmers? And many raised their hands. How many of you do long-term leases, like over 10 years? No hands. How about 5 years? 2 hands. How about 3 years? Maybe 3 hands. So we're not seeing yet the long-term commitment by even these organizations that are dedicated to long-term land stewardship. There are reasons and barriers to being able to have long-term relationships, but we really need to work on this because having a greater stake in the land is how we take care of it. The Javier Zamora right there bought his land with the help of a community development financial institution. We can ask our community development financial institutions, local banks, other lending programs to get creative and think about mortgages to working farmers. There's a local farms fund in New York in the Hudson Valley that has done some really important work thinking about, again, about raising local dollars to address the issue of land access for a regional food system. I have lots more examples and ideas that maybe we'll talk about in a little while. So, cooperative ownership is something that is just sort of starting to emerge on the scene as perhaps a way that farmers, by putting their resources together, might be able to work to access land in a more affordable way. I think we have to be careful about addressing the problem from the investor and farmer end, because we cannot forget that there are structural issues that create this affordability problem in the first place. And that's what I want to challenge us all to think about, is both long-term solutions and creative paths toward land tenure. So the future of our soil, of our food, and of our rural economies depends on the next generation of farmers and ranchers. These are the producers, the innovators, the business people, the environmental stewards who link us all to the land in a basic ecological relationship. So if we continue to be committed to the health of these people, to our landscapes and our democracy, our rural democracy, we have to strive to give farmers and ranchers a greater stake in the land. And we'll get to talk a lot more about the way that Eric and Stuart are supporting that as well.
So thank you so much, Kendra, and as you can tell, she's an absolute wealth of knowledge in these kinds of things. And the most important kind of bullets that I would highlight from her talk is long-term leases, how to move towards worker co-op ownerships in land trusts, and the new land trust succession issue that she spoke about with reference to Goodhuma's farm in Yolo County. So I now have the honor to bring up Eric Mathis, and Eric Mathis is going to basically tell us all about the, if I can read it, the emerging regenerative economy. So put your seatbelts on. Here's Eric.
Thank you, Thea. And I just want to say how humbled I am to be here, to be on a plenary. Don't let the suit fool you. Normally the attire that I wear is shorts, dirty hands, and sticking my finger in soils. But I'm a 15-year veteran of sustainability, regenerative development from North Carolina, regional trailer park trash, and kind of lifted myself up, stumbled into being in coal country for almost 10 years, developing what many of us refer to as climate change 2.0. And what that is not just pushing for a cap and trade bill, but we're looking to develop economic diversification in the heart of coal country and throughout central Appalachia to address diversifying the tax base as well as the voting constituency, which was kind of a blind area of climate change when I first stepped into the scene. So I'm happy to say that Climate Change 2.0 is quickly going viral with $3+ billion of impact investment going into entrepreneurship around regenerative agriculture, renewable energy, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm here. I usually leverage these types of presentations for announcing different iterations of work that myself and my team are working on. And going back to the relational component is I'm quickly moving into interfaith and interspiritual dialogue, which I think is kind of the primary kind of regenerative mode for linking a lot of things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go through these initial slides fairly quickly. The main download is these are process architectures, and there's thousands of them out there. And basically they act as kind of like my own personal mandala that I meditate on before I go off into communities and organize them and organize various financial engineering, et cetera, to build what I hope to be an emerging regenerative economy. So wanted to start this off. I will read this to you because I like saying it out loud. The only difference between the soul and the soil is you and I. And that's one thing that I want to contemplate on running through these fairly quickly is yesterday some folks were talking about reductionism and everything, and I think that we're moving more towards complex adaptive systems, non-linearity, et cetera, and it's these same processes that make up the architecture of soil. And not only the architectures of soil, our own cognitive architecture, and what I'll get into is the cosmic architecture. So these are just real quick. I'm sure every one of you know about mycorrhizal fungi, rhizomatic architectures, et cetera. A lot of my philosophical work is informed by a new field of thought around new materialism. Gilles Deleuze, et cetera. He is one of the philosophers that kind of spurred or connected the rhizomatic architecture to political theory. And cognitive architecture, I'm presently at the European Graduate School doing architectural theory and primarily praxis. As I said before, I like getting my hands dirty, less of this and more of this. And these are, what I'm wanting to do is basically synthesize the way that we think about things in terms of logos and SOPHIA, which is, of course, wisdom. There's a lot of these processes. This is the back-end architecture of a lot of things that makes this conference go on. And I'm going to connect these types of architectures to what we're doing in North Carolina, throughout the Southeast, and across the country. So yeah, there's parallel processors, shared memory. These are types of networks. These types of networks are often found in cognitive architecture, soil architectures. They have modular forms, rhizomatic forms, processing forms, meshworks, et cetera, and the network topologies. And I'd like to point everybody, before I go to the next slide, if you haven't already, in terms of mandalas, go and check out what's called the Bolshoi simulation. It's basically accumulated all the data in terms of identifying the superstructure of the universe, which has very similar structures of the architectures in soil as well as in our cognitive architectures. So that's kind of the contemplative process. Now what I really like getting into is the action. What are we doing on the ground in North Carolina, throughout the Southeast, and across the country? This quote is taken from a brilliant book by Stephen Strogatz. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. He was one of the forefathers of a new field called synchronization, and there's specific architectures that we're learning from within that newly emerging field, and we're using those architectures to begin designing cooperative innovation, of which I'll point everybody towards a book where some of my writings are a part of a chapter that fully explains what I mean by cooperative innovation, or what most folks, especially over at Berkeley, refer to as open innovation. Wow, that went quick. All right, and I'm done. So the memory, you got the Cleveland model, which are anchor institutions, hospitals, universities. These things are brilliant historical institutions that have computed over time the relationship to the body via health, and computed over time the relationship to the way that we cognitively relate to the world. So we link our models directly to these anchor institutions, as well as other ones, K through 12 schools, local nonprofits, government organizations, et cetera, et cetera. The control unit, and this is by analogy, it's not a direct correlation. The control unit is, I am the principal architect of business development innovation for Cycle Effect Regenerative Ventures. Chris, I warned you, I'm going to call you out. Anybody wants to stand up? Anybody wants to know about Cycle Effect Regenerative Ventures? It's basically our platform that allows for all the cooperative ecosystems that are developing various technologies, all the way to biofuel technologies, et cetera, or biopharmaceutical technologies. They enter this platform, and it incentivizes spillover effects between the scientists and the inventors and everything like that. The arithmetic logic unit. So back on, we don't really, at the Institute for Regenerative Design and Innovation, which we're presently launching, it's connected to several land-grant universities throughout the South, and we basically accumulate the previous kind of architectures, processes, strategies, design shreds, et cetera, and kind of navigate spillover effects by establishing peer-to-peer networks between different communities that we're working with, such as K through 12 school teachers that are doing really innovative stuff around, science and relating it to soils, and then getting those teachers to connect to other schools. The Sync Co-op, which is a part of a new company we actually just launched last week, Sync Bioresources. I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but basically we're building it around biofuels and linking that to industrial hemp. The oil production per acre is fairly high, and there's also other value added components all the way down to producing textiles, building materials, et cetera, that lower the cost to where we can actually remain competitive within the market with existing scaled biofuels, but we're doing it more distributed. And then the Health Innovation District, which is basically what I'm here to announce via YouTube, is we're based on my work up in Central Appalachia and a lot of what we've learned in terms of leveraging federally qualified health centers as anchor institutions and linking them to HUD housing and linking that to community gardens and the folks from low-income housing, grow food, and then you link in like dining for diabetes programs, et cetera. You're developing a very robust, intentional pipeline of pulling people out of poverty around health and then getting them into workforce development training programs, et cetera. Okay. The parallel processors, we in North Carolina are working with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture's Bioenergy Research Initiative. We've launched 2 pilot programs in Alamance County and Watauga County. Alamance County, I'm really excited about because what we're doing is linking not only biofuels to reduction in carbon, but we're actually linking it to regenerating soils with a cooperative of farmers of growing those oilseed crops, processing it, getting it into potentially Airmark at universities, then using the waste oil from that. But the cooperative itself is linked to low-income communities, communities of color, developing a really robust workforce development training program of previously incarcerated prisoners in Alamance County. On the Watauga side, there is a trend. Watauga, Boone, North Carolina was one of the first in the country to launch a 100% renewable energy by 2050. And there's 60 plus municipalities across the country who are doing this. So not many of them, if any, actually know what to do, so we're providing teeth to that municipal strategy up in Watauga County so we can scale it at hopefully the 2018 Energy Summit that was launched by Amory Lovins and a good friend of mine, Jed Moody, and hopefully Van, if you're watching, you better show up too. Van Jones is a longtime mentor of mine that hopefully he will be presenting there as well. Future innovation districts is hopefully planting my roots in Forsyth County and developing innovation district up there as well as in West Virginia, and hopefully establishing a partnership here in California, which I would love to talk to any of you all about on what we're doing here and developing kind of a national parallel processor. So these are just examples of innovation clusters that have similar architectures that I said before. This is an innovation district called the Wake Forest corridor that I'm hopefully in East Winston moving into. I gravitate to poverty. I feel at home there. Here is something that will make no sense to anybody, but what I want to direct you all to is a book that was published last year that I've started developing a series of chapters that are going to be published over the next 2 to 3 years, as well as 2 other books around how to do this, the theory behind it, and it's Living Architecture Systems Group out of the University of Waterloo and Riverside Press. And in closing, so the Ag Energy Nexus Strategy, I probably got about 30 more seconds, right? Energy Nexus Strategy. As I was up in coal country, I stumbled upon being a part of the core team that got industrial hemp legalized across the country, jumped over to West Virginia, got it legalized there, jumped down to North Carolina, got it legalized there, and we actually did it right in North Carolina. We moved everything through a farmers cooperative, so we were leveraging farming power, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're incubating these same cooperatives throughout the Southeast, and hopefully in partnership with some of our partners here, launching in a similar kind of platform here in California to hopefully lead up to launching a full-blown regenerative economy in 2018. The other component right now is we stumbled upon this space-age technology, literally kind of the smartphone biofuel refineries, and we're also working on wrapping that biofuel reactor with a biorefinery to where we can actually take waste food from grocery stores. Thank you. Waste food from grocery stores and harvest terpenes, other biopharmaceutical-based chemical compounds from waste food. And there's so many other layers and everything, but maybe we can answer those through the Q&A. Thank you so much.
So, in addition to 3 takeaways that I'll suggest to you, the one thing that may not have seemed transparent is the fact that these systems are based on individual initiative, being fired up to be alive, to work in collaboration with everybody in your life. And you decide what is the path that I'm going to take, where's my power, where's my weakness, who can I hang on to and jump with, that kind of thing. So that's really, really important because it's the inverse of the capitalistic system that we have right now. So it's a very healing modality. So just remember that, your voices when you stand up are your voices when you stand up, and your connections are the ones that leave the legacy that we want for our youngers. So 3 points that I want to elevate from Eric's talk is the diversity of the tax base. I mean, you probably know that, middle and lower income tax-based people are the ones who pay for our government. I mean, all the corporations, they're down to 3%, maybe less. So that's a pretty important issue. So if you're interested in that, have an appetite for that direction, by all means, take it on. The new materials issue, there's a very interesting growth area. And I like the parallel processing and the cognitive architecture, but I want everybody to really check out the Boschier simulation superstructure for universes, because after all, we're results of the Big Bang. You know, we might as well bang on, right? So with that, I want to have the opportunity of inviting our third and very important, equally important, my friend, Stuart Valentine, who's now in Michigan, joining us from Michigan. And he is a high net worth investor, manager, and a chair of the board of the Fairfield, Iowa Sustainable Living Coalition. And I hear a terrible hum that's making me nervous. And his presentation is the Community Cultural Food Shed Resilience Program. Stuart, welcome.
Yes, hi, Theo. And audience, I don't know, are people able to hear me all right? Can somebody give me a thumbs up on the panel? Eric, can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Great, all right. I am looking at the panel, not the audience at the moment. Oh, I see myself, okay. Very good. Well, thank you, Theo, for pulling this panel together, because in my view, I really think the local food shed resilience program that Theo and I have been working on now for the last couple of years is one of the most integral and foundational dimensions of securing our democracy going forward. Because the entity that controls the food supply controls the population effectively. And we all have seen the trend towards industrial ag and what it means to our community fabric. And I think there can be no more important investment than to put our attention on restoring soil health, community health around the theme of food production. I'm coming into this conversation, just a very brief backdrop. I live in Fairfield, Iowa. And as you can see on my PowerPoint slide, the quote, only a new seed will yield a new crop. That came from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when he came to the state in the late 50s, transcendental meditation. And this, of course, is what we're doing here in this conference. We're exploring ways. The opening speaker was discussing about how to change our lifestyle, how to change our paradigm. What are the ingredients that go into that? And Fairfield is a very interesting experiment. The experiment is essentially now 40 years old. And what is that trying to do, Theo? Oh. Okay, no, I'll be indicating to Chris when I want the PowerPoint slide changed, okay? So at any rate, just very briefly, this is an experiment in investing primarily in the development of consciousness through group meditation that spawns all the way through to the children based on a new set of principles about integration with the totality of life, rather than being stuck in the old modality, which we all grew up in and are still dominantly living in, which is what you might think of as a reductionist, mind-based approach to life and living. So how, as Eric was talking about, how do we go from reductionism to adaptive complex systems? Is that just an exercise of left brain thinking, or is it something more comprehensive than that? And of course, the experiment of Fairfield is that we need to actually train the mind to think more comprehensively, to integrate the dimension of doing with that of being. So in my journey along the way, I take this local food shed resilience as kind of a primary focus, and I engage it through my role as chair of the board for a nonprofit called the Sustainable Living Coalition, in which we focus on local food shed resilience, through my educational role as a adjunct faculty at Maharishi University of Management, teaching in the Sustainable Living department and in the MBA program. And third is my role as an investment advisor and manager focused on the whole domain of socially responsible investing and impact investing, with an eye toward transforming finance to develop a more full beneficial outcome than just the singular target of profit. So Eric, you can switch to the next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on three elements of this talk. One is to highlight how critical new ownership and governance structures are to securing a healthy land base for our food production system. And one of the themes that occurs throughout the conference, and I certainly heard it from Kendra and Eric this morning, is about how to approach the ownership dilemma. Because the free market, as it is operating, is producing a very predictable outcome of consolidation of land in ever more large-scale farms. That is the nature of the design of capital that we are living within right now. Unfortunately, that concentration produces a really rather bleak landscape. I live in southeast Iowa. I can see the remnants of the very rich Iowa farm economy of 100 years ago, and I can see where it is today. What's beautiful about the opportunity we're in right now is there is enough individuals who lived, who are 80, 90 years old, who remember that time. And those elders are very active in commenting on the current economic culture of agribusiness as we know it. So we need to think about designing for a restoration of community vitality. And ownership system and structure is vital or key to that. One book that really helped me along the way, I'm sure many of you have read it, was Marjorie Kelly's landmark book titled Owning Our Future. If you haven't picked that up, I recommend it because it really takes us into rethinking how we can do ownership. And in my little slice of activity, I play in a board capacity with what's called the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. Kendra touched on that very importantly. The Land Trust, our view is that it must produce an ownership path for the farmer. We must be able to reward the very real hard work that goes on with farming with an ownership end game. So these temporary structures are not going to produce the lasting sustainability that we need. And the Land Trust, in my view, is the best structure I know of that can actually provide for affordability, accessibility, and preservation of farmland. It also is critical that we build on our national network of education programs surrounding new farmers coming in who have the skill set, farm regeneratively, who understand soil biology. We've been able to launch at Maharishi University of Management under the directorship of a gentleman named Dr. Timalaya, a certification program in regenerative, organic, and biodynamic agriculture. It's the first year of the program, but the idea is to work collaboratively with Sustainable Iowa Land Trust to not only secure the land, but also generate the new farm talent that can come onto the land. There's many programs nationwide. In fact, I imagine in the audience, there's probably at least a dozen programs that are already doing this. And the real important dimension, Eric, you brought up the term meshwork, is that we need to act as pollinators in connecting programs so that we quickly find best-in-class practices, best-in-class organizational structure, and share that with each other to move and optimize this direction towards sustainable farms. Actually, Eric, I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide, please? The Sky Factory, yes, Sky Factory's case study. So as we move from this reductionist into complex adaptive systems or whole systems approach, I wanted to showcase also the role that business needs to start playing in this regard. Here's a picture of the launch in Fairfield, Iowa, of what's called Sky Factory. Sky Factory is a very interesting consensus-based business that produced a solar farm that produces more electricity than they use, so they're net energy positive. And within the Sky Factory business model, they have a farm, 3-acre farm that provides food for the employees. Faith Reeves is the woman who heads up the farm. And the farm is not just, isolated to Sky Factory. It's a resource center farm that provides soil analysis and testing, consulting for local area farmers. She has a mineral bank, so she can provide products to the farmers who want to head toward transition. So think of this. En route to Michigan, I drove through the Chicago area, and on Interstate 88, there's corporate campus after corporate campus after corporate campus, all with green grass covered with Roundup Ready that cost those companies thousands per year to keep mowed. Well, imagine if the corporate culture shifted a little bit and said, all these grounds that we have in green grass, we shift toward a permaculture style farmstead that provides food for our employees. Okay, 1 minute. Got it. So my point is that business is going to play a very important role in absorbing and creating food production zones on what now is idle land. So the third dimension, next slide, please. This is just a picture of campus at Maharishi University of Management. The sustainable living building is net energy positive, processes its own water, etc. Just to the left is the sustainable living farms where the education process is going on. Next slide, please. So in order to get into the investment side, the flow of capital needs to be redirected. And in the idea here is a new set of principles guiding that capital. Are we at the slide that says new principles and circuitry, Chris? Yes, we are. Okay. Here's the idea. The current system of credit and capital is designed based on a 500-year-old mindset of colonial empire building. We need to actually apply design principles to capital itself. And we believe that the best place to start is using biomimicry principles. So we've gone down the road of developing these principles, generating material that investment managers can use. And of course, the final one, okay, time is up. Next slide, please, Jobs Act. This is going to be the key element. Chris discussed, or Eric, you mentioned the cell phone. Social networking and crowdfunding techniques, all of us need to be looking for ways where we can be part of the solution by directing our investment capital through crowdfunding type channels into regenerative agriculture. Next slide, please. Also, we need to rethink philanthropy, because philanthropy is playing an important role and can play a more impactful role. This book I co-authored with Stephen Loving will be out within 2 weeks that will go into the design framework for redirecting capital for higher impact. And finally, next slide. This is a model that actually describes how we can go about deploying this consciousness exercise into our own life in directing capital into the various branches of what we call the growing green economy. Impact investing, organic agriculture, renewable energy, community investing, community banking. So with that, I will wrap that up. So thanks for listening, and I hope we end up making more connections as a result of this.
So thank you so much, Stuart, for that. Just recapping, It's land trusts, particularly community land trusts, in which the community owns 51% and the farmers own 49%. Farmer ownership, absolutely critical. Biomimicry investing, and the ways to transition to whole community involvement. In other words, it's time to aggregate, brothers and sisters. So I just want to ask the panel, do you have questions for each other, or shall we open it up to the wisdom of the room? No, it's up to you. Do you have a burning question? For us, or for Stuart?
Maybe for Stuart.
Okay.
And for everybody else.
Okay.
One thing that resonated to me, Stuart, during your presentation, is you are linking design strategies directly to financial modeling and everything like that. And as a backdrop, using biomimicry, that resonates beautifully in terms of what I believe a lot of folks need to open up to more market-based strategies, and those types. So can you point towards one or two, or just one really, really potent one for the audience to walk away with?
Well, I would say that the principles of ethical biomimicry finance, as we call it, are laid out. We work very closely with Janine Benyus of the Biomimicry Institute on developing that. And the book I profiled, The Nature of Investing, with Catherine Collins, who wrote the book, is helping to educate what those patterns and what those principles are, but that the investment manager, in crafting a business plan and an investment model, can begin to measure what we call multiple beneficial outcomes of a given investment that is under consideration. And now, Eric, you're fully doing this in the kinds of investments you're up to, but how can we help capital market players identify those companies that are based on that framework versus those that have a singular profit outcome as their design principle? So
thank you,
this
Stuart.
is growing a new class
Okay.
of investment managers who look at the market through a different pair of glasses. It's not a simple quick fix.
Yeah, great, Stuart. Thank you so much. I also want to open up to just slow money and direct relationship-driven investing. I am a slow money investor. I have 17 infrastructure investments based on relationships. Ain't easy, brothers and sisters, but it's real. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you would be so kind as to come with any questions you have for any of these really remarkable presenters to that mic, you will be heard by Stuart as well as those of us here.
Hi, thank you. My name's Dana Smirin, and I'm lucky enough to live between here and South Africa, and have done so for 30 plus years. And there's some fantastic models that I always find in the US, but in the South we're designing out of a different driver and necessity. Drought, poverty, townships, lack of education, and I see lots of correlations. In my past, one of my past worlds is I used to help do fundraising around corridors of land for migration of African animals and the Mesoamerican corridor, and thinking along those lines. And I'm feeling if we look 5-10 years ahead, we're in gear, this is rolling. Are you looking at setting up corridors so that we can avoid some of these BT shifts? And perhaps if you could speak to that, because I'm seeing on the map a lot of clusters, and that we're working reactively where we can embrace bringing in some of the players. But for us, what we're doing in South Africa is we're really trying to do corridors so that the spray of gases or fumigation is not hitting certain land masses, because I live on a biodynamic farm just outside Cape Town, and we suffer because of the spraying of all the vineyards around us. So if we can just talk to the future and what we're doing around corridors. Thank you.
The short answer for us is yes. So if you look on the map of North Carolina, Watauga County is linked directly to Forsyth County, and then Greensboro, then Alamance County, then Duke or Durham, which is the Research Triangle Park, which was the premier innovation district through the Brookings Institute report that came out 3 years ago. So yes, but our broader, the report that we're going to be releasing in a couple of months through NC State University in collaboration with some of our partners here in California, is developing a bioregional approach. So it's very bottom up and everything.
Also, for those of you familiar with Park Service activities, the Park Service is very proactive in buying corridors and creating, freeway underpasses, overpasses for animals where highways intersect their habitats. And they basically plan far ahead, so if a piece of land becomes available and it's right where they want it, they are like ready, they have the fund. And so A, support the Park Service, B, biomimic their investing habits with reference to corridors.
That's a great question, and I think a great challenge also for us to, in thinking about the design of these systems that are integrated, to challenge both nonprofit land trusts that are doing their land acquisition strategies, as well as governments and regional partnerships that we're seeing emerge more and more, with local governments working with other local governments to think on a larger scale about the importance of those kinds of corridors. So I think the nonprofit sector, driven by individual, look at waterfowl corridors on the rice fields that my husband's working with, or the importance of, waterways in general are the quintessential corridor, aren't they? And then the blueprint projects that various local governments are working on to think about these together. How do we get all these voices at the table at the same time, and how do we hear them all? It's a good challenge.
Could I just say one brief point about this, which is this illustrates a really critical paradigm shift, that as the investor historically has been looking for a single outcome, profit, financial gain. But, what we might think is now transitioning that to think, am I investing in the enhancement of life? And what is the dimension of the impact of my investment? Investing for enhancing life includes profit, but it includes many other dimensions alongside it.
Yes, and if anyone wants to know how the bases on which I make my investments, I'd be happy to share it with you. But there was something Stuart didn't get to say, and so I'm going to put that out there because this is really critical for Middle America, and that is that the soy and corn lands, extend off to the edge of the river. In other words, there's no buffer zone there. So what Susan Aram, the executive director of SILT, the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, presented at the Land for Good Changing Lands, Changing Hands conference, which was the first activity that has addressed succession for farmers in the United States as a national issue. She said that I'll hold it up.
Actually, that slide is in my PowerPoint, Theo. If you wanted to scroll on through, it's the last slide in the PowerPoint.
So, Stuart, if I may, I'm just going to grab it. So basically, you have a river, you have fruit trees planted next to the river, you have your produce crops next to that, you have a little house for the farmer to live, and the benefits to the corn and soy guy is that A, he gets a beautiful view shed, B, he may have participation in the product and in the money from the thing, and C, if he ever wants to sell it, boy, has he increased his property value, and he gets a tax credit. So, we've got some strategies coming up for, converting the prairie back to fecund land. So, other questions, please? Do we have any more questions? One more question.
Hi, my name is Ariel Aronson-Eves, and I'm a farmer turned seminarian. And I was a little late, but I walked in when Eric was talking about the role of spirituality and religion in Climate Change 3.0. And I go to farmer conferences or things like this, and there's this definite presence of spirituality. And I go into a lot of churches and religious spaces, and there's a definitive lack of ecological awareness. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on what you see as the role of religion and how we might be able to shift those religious institutions to be aware of their role in this.
Well, upon leaving coal country and exhausting myself and collapsing to the point of going into the hospital, I had a spiritual awakening about 2 years ago. My lineage is Christian, so I'm going back to my home and entering these institutions that ran me away from that. And what I learned from coal country, and this gets into your question and everything, is when I went into it and people were dropping N-bombs or racists or et cetera, I didn't speak truth to power to those moments because there was a bigger issue in terms of climate change and saving humanity and et cetera, et cetera. So going into those conversations, both within Baptist churches, Pentecostal, et cetera, with an open mind, knowing that, I'm gonna hear things that I don't agree with, but trying to find those things that you do agree with, similar to the architecture that I was talking about. But more than that, what we're doing in some of these innovation corridors, it's about enriching really dense networks. It's about unitive intelligence, not artificial intelligence. So developing interfaith dialogue between, Stuart used the tree of life. There's an actual tree of life called moringa that we're planting in a impoverished community and bringing, bringing several religions coming in as an act to plant that and everything. So yeah, we're out of time. Does that make?
I have a comment on that, if I could.
Yeah, our time is up, Stuart.
What I think you're speaking to is really quite critical for all of us as individuals. Those of us who are involved in church type of communities, to make the distinction between what you might think of as received religion, right, where no questioning, you receive the religious doctrine, versus giving life to contextual theology, where you are the living exponent of life. And as such, making that, generating that communication about the vitality of life, that the contrast is so clear, what you spoke to, of feeling a spiritual living moment versus a dogmatic or doctrine-based received theology. So we have to, as individuals, model within our religious institutions what it is to be a living spiritual being versus a passive recipient of received religion.
Ho!
So thank you all so much for the opportunity.
So Osprey is going to come up and do our next panel, and I'm going to move this podium for her. But if I can just say, this is all being live streamed, so it would be really appreciated if you would get it out to your friends. Send emails, Twitter, whatever you can to get folks watching it, because we're hoping that this will be seen by many more people than just who's here today. Thank you.